Happy to see a completely sold out audience and standing room only. But I'm happy to see all of you, and certainly happy to have, I mean, for me this is a joy just because I get an opportunity to ask Colin questions that I wanted to ask him. And by the way, we're also going to record it as a podcast, which is kind of additional, but there are a couple things that I'm going to say because we are recording as a podcast, and it'll be a YouTube video as part of a podcast that I host called Score the Podcast. And so this is going to be part of it, and that will make sense. Also, we will have a little Q&A afterwards, but it won't be part of the podcast because it would sound odd if you're doing your exercise one morning, listening to a podcast, and you hear voices from the back of the room asking Colin questions. I also am going to start it this way. This is part of the World Soundtrack Academy Awards Week, and we are all happy to be part of this experience. I know that I am. This is a very important week for the world of film music, and I always love coming to Ghent, of course, but just to be with the community of film composers, many of whom in this room I just love. I just have great affection. Some of whom I've done podcasts with, I see in this room. So it's lovely to be here. And I'm also honored to be with Colin, who, I don't know if any of you were lucky enough to see the show last night. Pretty life-changing in some ways. And I rarely say that. I just thought it reminded me, it asked me a lot of questions. That's what Colin showed you last night. It asked me a lot of questions about what meaning is in music and what things I might have forgotten. As some of you know, all of you know, Colin's, of course, incredible composer and performer. We saw that last night. He's also scored many very interesting films. I actually first was aware of him as a composer for The Menu, which I recommend if you haven't seen it. I watched it again and took copious notes on the music, and then really good film music allows you to forget that you're actually supposed to be listening to the music and you're watching the show.
Oh, I really love that point.
And that happened. It did.
Good.
That's the best, the bad film music is like, man, I hate this music. You shouldn't be even
Can't stop hearing this. Yeah.
I'm going to share some quotes with you.
Okay.
This is going to be the way that I thought we'd have a conversation. Do you know whose quotes they are? Yours.
Uh-oh.
I took them out of interviews with you, and they kind of summarized all the topics that I'm interested in asking.
Okay.
So,
I'll try to be as eloquent or more eloquent than my previous self was.
These quotes are pretty awesome.
Okay,
So,
good.
I'm going to share with you Colin's own words on topics that I find really interesting to talk about. Number one, this feels like Jeopardy. I actively shun notions of category and genre in my life and appetites, and most definitely in my own music.
Woo.
Please compare
That's
and
good one.
contrast.
It's on like a root level, fundamental. It's kind of hygiene. I think of consumption of things like with the music that I'm listening to, the times of day that I'm listening to it, like what I eat or how I care for my basic hygiene, like through and throughout, especially as it pertains to something that I'm working on. Like if I'm preparing to make a solo record or a score for something. For example, Hereditary. When I first talked to Ari about doing Hereditary, this was, I think, 2 years before we actually started making Hereditary, but he had already finished the script. He approached me and said that here was this script that he had written, listening to my solo music, and would I be interested in doing something like that? Yes, yes, yes. I read the script and it was brilliant, and so I immediately went on a. I mean, it's not that I'm not a horror buff. I would not say that I'm like into any particular genre of film or music, but I immediately went into kind of like a embargo of sorts on all horror. Not anything past or present, and because I didn't want anything to seep in through the cracks. Because I mean, the way that I understand myself in the world is that I'm an experiential filter, and so everything that I kind of steep in throughout the day and throughout the weeks and months and years is going to come through in what it is that then I express. And so subconsciously, consciously, unconsciously, those things are coming through. And so I do try to think very actively and intentionally in terms of prohibiting and also feeding whatever particular flame that it is that I'm working on. So for something like my solo record Judges, when I was working on that film, writing and preparing to record it, I listened to almost exclusively just like the, I don't know if you know the compilation Goodbye Babylon, all pre-war gospel music. So I was just listening to almost entirely that. It's a precious,
fabulous.
Yeah. Set of music.
American gospel?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So, yeah. I could continue to wander into
That's
that
what
direction.
I like.
But
I like wandering. I do know that the last composition you performed last night was maybe the greatest horror cue I've ever heard in my life.
Ooh.
And I have a lot of questions about it, but in that red visual behind you, I thought, this is scary. This is really scary. Next quote.
Okay.
I mean, and I could go on for a long time about
I know we can get into the weeds. I feel like the weeds would be fun.
We could do some weeds. This is more specifically to the arena that this award show honors and the week honors. Quote, I love the puzzles involved in designing a score, cracking certain codes for what each story needs and how best to bring it together in a way that's novel, effective, and exciting. I just want to tee up your answer by saying what you did last night and the act of scoring a film in some ways to me are about as different as they say in England as chalk and cheese. Scoring a film is this kind of neurotic, compulsive detail, very responsive to everyone's opinion. Well, that's really nice. If you have found filmmakers who say, just have at it and call me when you're done, I'd like to have their number. But you say here that it's a puzzle, and maybe that puzzle is part of negotiating it, but I thought you vacillate clearly not vacillate actually, just alternate between this kind of performance mode. I don't think anybody told you what to play last night. And scoring a film, you've got a director saying, or maybe you haven't had those directors. Not yet.
No, it's...
Good luck, call me.
Well, I would say that the solo music and so when that set and each cell, each song, each piece of music is that's how did you put it? Like intricately
neurotically, compulsively.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Those are all set pieces of music that have a form that I don't derivate from. So the only things that can happen that there can be a push and pull and stretching depending on the venue, depending on the size of the room, like how I'm feeling in it, like physically how I'm feeling, whether something ends up being slightly slower or a little bit more methodical, or sometimes it's I'm expressing a little bit more patience than other times. Sometimes I'm coming with much more of an adrenalized sort of state, and so things can be much more dynamic and and so
By the way, that's amazing. I just want to say, I didn't know if last night you were improvising a lot.
No, none of that is improvised. So just to illustrate that, for me that set has an arc, in much, if not exactly the same kind of ways that I would have an arc for a score. And so then when I make a record, same sort of thing. I've been, before I started scoring films, I've been making solo records, and the solo records that I make, they all have, like when I write a solo record, I first write a kind of a narrative, imagery, narrative, like an actual story. And so there is, and they tend to be kind of like these surrealistic sort of magical realism, the fables, but they're very, very fleshed out and clear and concise to me. They're not necessary for anybody to share with audience members. It's not, but for me, they having those storylines that can weave and create the full arc. Then it's like, I was describing this to somebody the other day. You know how when like the new 3D printing of human organs, when they're doing these things where they're growing organs over, so they 3D print this like a structure out of a kind of polymer that is rigid, that will accept the cells as they grow, and then eventually it dissolves into the form into the cells of the new meat. And so the story is the 3D printed structure that eventually just dissolves into the cells, which is the music that's left behind. But so the intention is there. So the arc, the story, the intention is kind of imbued into the music. And so all that to say, I'm doing kind of the same thing with solo music in the context of a record, in the context of the stage.
It's almost like directing yourself.
As I'm doing for a score.
Have you had an experience where a director says, "I love what you do, and that's why we brought you on"? Now, is there any way you can change everything that you do to kind of accommodate the film? Because a lot of times, filmmakers will hire the coolest guy on the block because it gives them the imprimatur of having a super cool score and composer, but then they get nervous and try and put you in a box. Have you been put in those kind of boxes?
I think because of where I come from, it really is only recently that people have, since Hereditary. So before Hereditary, every director who came to me for a score was coming to me because of the solo music. Ari came to me because of the solo music, and Ari originally was kind of imagining that it would be entirely a solo score, and so it wasn't until I did what and I wrote most of the score a year before the film was finished, and so he had it on set, and so I was just kind of giving him cues, being like, this is what I'm imagining based on our conversations. This is, and some of it is fundamentally solo music, but a lot of it is not. But it all stems from the things that he appreciated about my solo work. No, the thing that happens more of the time actually now is that people come to me for a score, and maybe they think they want, like something that I did recently. I can say, I don't think that anybody would get pissed off if I say this publicly. The menu was temped out almost entirely with Hereditary music. When I got it, and I had talked with Mark and Betsy when I was kind of pitching for the film, and I was like, the script is perfect. It structurally, the music is all there, and this is what I'm imagining. And I don't think they quite. They were like really into it, but they also, I think they still were in this world where that kind of vibe of what they knew of me was still happening, much to a much greater extent. And then so when I started handing in cues, that was completely outside of what anybody imagined from my horror music or from my solo music. Yeah, it wasn't received in any way other than like, oh, now I get it. I get what you're talking about.
Were they okay with it?
Oh, no. I mean, I had almost no notes for the menu.
I'm going to work on your films. Because the menu's really interesting. I mean, we watched it with subtitles, of course. Everybody's now listening to and watching. And there's a great subtitle during the Make Me a Cheeseburger scene. It says intense classical music here. Because they sometimes tell you,
that's weird.
Cars driving by, you'll read at the bottom. I thought intense classical music, but I thought that's an interesting Netflix interpretation of what's being
a very interesting
It's a great score, and it's really, first of all, what a huge compliment that Mark sought you out.
Tremendous.
He knows, I mean, look at Nick Bertel in Succession. He's good with music.
He's good with everything, and he's just one of the sweetest people I've ever met.
You're so lucky, man. I want your career. You haven't met the completely horrible director.
They don't come to me.
Who comes to you. No, they will. They will, and the second thing they'll say to you after giving you their resume is, I played bass in a band in high school, so man, I really understand music. And then you find out they don't understand anything. One more quote, which really pertains to something very interesting that I saw last night, but also something about our contemporary era. I'll always push myself physically in the making of this music. There's something about the energetic state of being in the limits of our grasps, maneuvering through extremities, that I find not only cathartic, but hugely satisfying. I'll tell you
that sounds like something I said.
I'll tell you why I like that. 2 reasons, and then maybe you can share how that applies to composition particularly. But last night when you walked on stage, I'm sure some of you saw that, I had the feeling I was watching an athlete getting ready to do an Olympic event. You were kind of in the dark, and you sort of were putting some things on and arranging your body, and it's like you were going to dive into the pool.
Yeah, you didn't see what came even before that in the back room.
I bet. But you remind me, as I was taught very early on as a musician, well, music is hands and breath. I was taught, it's a physical evocation of moving your hands and breathing. And when I saw you last night, I thought, no, isn't music standing behind a guy who's sitting at a screen moving pink and green squares up and down? That's what it's become. No, man, drag that over here, and here, let me go over to this menu and loop the effect that yours is about physicality and breathing. And do you feel like that's unique now? Do you feel like that's something we've lost? Do you have to stay in shape to play your instruments?
This is going to take the rest of the podcast.
Let's go, man. We're here. We have all day, or...
Is it something that's unique now? No, it's something that's rare now. Something we lost, not entirely. The people who still engage in hugely physical acts are still engaging in hugely physical acts, and in all ways, the people who are really doing it are doing it more than it's ever been done, arguably. So yeah, there certainly is not gone. What was number 3? Is it unique? Has it been lost?
I'm staying in shape to be a musician.
Yeah. So when I was young, I was a jock. I was an athlete, but I was like a jock artist. And so I was painting since I was 2. I was sculpting. I went both to music school and art school. My first year, I was a double major in music and art. I scholarshiped on music, but I also got into the art school at University of Michigan. I stopped doing that after the first year because it was too much. I never slept. I practiced for 10 hours a day. I did not sleep for a year, and it was just too much to keep everything in order. But so art and music were always a part of it, but I was a wrestler for, 5-6 years. I was a soccer player my whole life. Eventually started playing football in high school. I was a pole vaulter. I just did a lot of hugely strenuous, expressive, extreme physical state sort of. And I think wrestling probably is the most extreme, mentally pole vaulting, mentally, emotionally, that kind of
That's why I had to stop pole vaulting. Yeah. I just pushing it too far. Sorry.
But physically, the extremity that one gets into when you're wrestling. I mean, it's just you're holding. It's like tensing your whole body and then holding that tension, against another body that's tensing its whole self in exertion against you for 15, 20 minutes, whatever. And it's so there's it dissolves everything else in the world. There's no future or past. There's only present. And so having that be the basis for so much of how it is that my body then exists in the world through time, through my life, I've always engaged with the music in much the same way. And so you tap into I feel as though I tap into the real stuff, get into the core of get past the walls, the barriers, past the glaze that maybe is protecting the soft underbelly from the world. You get to the things that are just fully vulnerable when you kind of tear away at it so much through that exertion. As an aside and just kind of a related tangent, I heard not too long ago, but I heard that Berry Gordy in Motown would do a thing where he'd have guys come in and he'd purposefully change. He'd make everybody play the song in a key that was just too high for the singer to sing, so that they would have to fucking go for it. And that's how he got these amazing performances. He put them in a state of extremity, a state of reaching. And so I like to put myself in a state of reaching.
It's so interesting because in some ways that's the an articulate way of saying getting out of your comfort zone.
Yeah.
In I like that Berry Gordy story. You also reminded me when we first talked, there's something about nutrition on both a intellectual, spiritual, and physical level that you're kind of around. And I never thought about it in the positive. I usually I'll see a movie or listen to something and say, zero nutritional value. It's just, that doesn't.
And usually when you have that reaction, it's actually negative. It's not just zero, it's that it's really actually quite bad for you.
Yeah. You touched a little bit on, University of Michigan. I mean, your background and your path, we talked about a little before we started. One thing I found interesting is that you play the saxophone, which for an American musician, almost always, I mean, you're really unique, unless it's an orchestral musician. Most American musicians talk about bird, prez, train, and then it starts to go into, well, there was also, Jan Garbarek vibe. I went down there, or Wayne Shorter and those years. It doesn't feel to me, though I am ready to stand corrected. You picked up the saxophone, but that didn't feel like, you mentioned Ornette in an interview. Did you go down the path of, here's the American saxophone tradition, or did you kind of lock into where you headed?
Both.
Without both, okay.
Well, no, I was a classical player in high school, but I was also studying jazz, and I was also studying free improvisation. And so, when I was in high school, still I was playing in the what was called the Creative Arts Ensemble, which was kind of like a free improv group at the university, and I was also in like a rock band, and for friends in high school, and I was also doing like a jazz side trio with two friends from high school, and I was also doing concerti, and so it's always been a multiplicity of things in terms of like whom like my bright spot lineage thing would be is like Ben Webster, Cannonball, Sonny Rollins, Albert Ayler, Thomas Chapin, more modern, Peter Brotzman, Tim Byrne, but I mean, of course, Ornette, Train, and Bird, and the first seed of the music that I play today, and it's actually on my first record, is like the seed of it was actually conceived of when I was, I think, must have been 18 or 19 latest. That was when I first kind of conceived of what it was that I'm doing today. My teacher in high school taught me how to circular breathe when I was 15. And I was using it in myriad ways, but only, I think, really codified it in my own mind when I was 19 and started to do this. And then, so the rest has been a path. So that's been the light that's kind of shown through it all, and then I've engaged in all of this other not to kind of discard it. I don't mean it in that way, but I've been doing, playing with singer-songwriters, playing with rock bands, playing more improv-based music, playing more straight-ahead jazz.
Arcade Fire and Bon Iver and all those dates. It's good.
Yeah.
I just didn't know if that was sort of by omission or commission.
No.
I'm not going to play Satin Doll in 12 keys. And
I did. There was a conscious. That much I will say. That there's a conscious omission on the part. When I was in college, I was studying classically with Donald Cinta, and I also had jazz lessons for several years, and he gave everyone this book of patterns, 251 patterns, and I looked at it and I was like, I'll never ever look at that. I'll never study it. He'll hate me. He'll give me a bad grade. I'm never going to look at those things, because it just felt like I don't know why. It felt so toxic to me, the idea that I was going to learn somebody else's language, and I was going to, because I saw everybody sounding the same, and it was just kind of like you saw like the academization of jazz, and I never saw the music that way. I never saw it as like this codified pillar, something frozen, but that book felt frozen to me, and so I avoided it. It made me less of a conventional jazz player, but then it also like allowed me to keep my voice, like a certain distance shot. Like I could keep my long range vision
super
going.
Originality path too.
Yeah, but I mean, it also didn't hurt that. And maybe really was the thing that's kept me in it for all these years, is that I remember I've been playing solo concerts since of music that resemble this since I was 19. Like and these are like little moments of just the zygote. But when I was in my mid-20s, I was living in San Francisco, and I got the opportunity to play, and I don't even remember how the opportunity to do this happened, but I played Easter Sunday, played a solo concert Easter Sunday at the National Shrine of St. Francis of Assisi in San Francisco. I'm playing my music, and there are monks with braziers walking around the hall, and I had kind of I'm not a religious person, like I'm the opposite of that, but I love those structures, I love those buildings, and so it was really a beautiful experience to be in there and to get to play there. But I did have in the back of my mind, these guys must hate this, and at the end, contrary to my initial fears, they came up to a man. They all came up to me and said how much they appreciated it, and they started quoting Bible verses to me, and I was like, oh wow, if the monks like it too.
Thelonious Monks.
Then so I mean, things like that where it's just affirmations.
You're
still doing something that's important. Just keep going.
You reminded me in that story of something I thought we'd talk about, years from today or right now on the podcast. I didn't know if it'd be. I've had the experience listening to your music that I haven't remembered having, which is that there's a connection in the breathing and the drone to a world of spirituality that I'd forgotten. Oh, that's right. Music can do that. Even last night, there was this feeling of somewhere between Tuvan throat singing and kind of didgeridoo and kind of drones, and I actually allowed myself to kind of trance out a little bit.
Good.
Oh, good. Okay. And just think, I don't remember. It's not the trance of being in the Sahara tent at Coachella and thump, thump, thump. It was sort of a different vibe, and I thought, it's interesting to hear you say, it's not a spiritual thing because...
I didn't say that, but I'm...
Okay, good.
We're going to get into... There's going to be a lot of weeds if we start getting into the semantics of a word like spiritual. Like
I felt connected to a larger space last night.
Yes.
Through the drone.
Yeah.
Just through the drone. And I thought, this is ancient. Guys have droned for a long time, and I'd forgotten that. And we're all packaged in this universe. And I just dug the fact that, whoa, one of the things Colin's doing is kind of, connecting to it.
Well,
anybody with perfect pitch can tell me what note I just hit, because I'm blessed with an assistant who would go E flat.
People all over the world have developed ways to use their breath and to use tools to make continuous sound. In my opinion, that seems to point to, I would theorize that came before our actual language, because what is the thing? What that is an attempt to do is to interact with nature. Where our first attempts at communing and convening with all of that is, we figure out a way to make sound on its terms in its context, and so I think of all of circular breathing and all that as being kind of like pre-language, like language 1.0 kind of thing, and so getting back to the very beginning, I have said this. I don't know if this was one of your quotes, but I have talked about this film a number of times in interviews over the years. But there was a documentary about a family of a tribe of chimpanzees called the People of the Forest. It was narrated by Donald Sutherland, and I had this. I remember it was early '90s. I was in college. And we were watching this a lot, and we found it fascinating. But at one point, there was a huge thunderstorm, and so the lightning strikes and big thunder raging, and most of the tribe goes and kind of hides in the trees and runs for cover, and the big males and some others would run out into the clearings, and they would shake trees and scream and shake trees and take rocks and throw them up at the sky. That's it. That's religion.
And on that note, I was thinking, I wonder if Stanley Kubrick saw that for the first scene, where the guys are like throwing the bone up in the air, and I really dig that. I like. We're trying to. In some ways, you're leading us back to. That's what I was saying. It asked a lot of questions last night. Because it asked questions of, well, what is music in my life? I mean, I was just thinking while I listened, what is music in my life? What are my values in music? The spirituality in music, have I completely lost that thinking about chart positions? I think it's important what you're doing. How about that? I think it's important because it asks the questions that everyone in this room who's involved in music, unless there's a lot of spiritual gurus in this room that are just hiding in plain sight, it's just been lost, all this stuff. What could be, how music is this, what did Kandinsky say? All art aspires to the condition of music. It's, you know, it's something elevated. It's not verbal, it's not visual. It's this thing, this feeling. And
but that's it. It's ultimately, like, no matter the technique that you get there with, ultimately it's an aesthetic, and it has to be recognized. It has to be, and I do think, or I do feel that the aesthetic is the recognition of some part of our emotional existence in another.
two of your titles I wrote down last night are extremely, you wouldn't, I guess, imagine that they're extremely romantic ideas of what you're saying. The love it took to leave you, very, whew, that made me think. That made me think.
Me too.
And Safe With Me. I thought, wow, those are really relationship-oriented ideas. And then you play something, I think, okay, I'm not sure where this is going and why this is the love it takes to leave you, but that's a deep idea. I know that our time is short. I did promise that I'd ask about, I want to call it omakase, which is when you go to a sushi bar and they feed you, but it's not called omakase, it's called yuzumaki. So we could talk about omakase for any of you who are hungry. It's that single price and the guy feeds you and you can't change, particularly in LA. You better not ask for any substitutions.
No.
But I know you're about to work on or have already worked on, but the highly anticipated Yuzumaki, did I pronounce it correctly, is set to release this year. How familiar were you with manga before the project?
Almost everything that I do is one of those projects that's kind of like, oh no, that one, I want that. And so Uzumaki the same. But it was the first thing, it is finally going to be coming out, I think is why we're talking about it now. It's finally going to be coming out at the end of this year.
Oh, so it was done? It
was the first thing that I did in pandemic.
Oh,
I had been hired, and it was a really lovely and strange way to inhabit those months. But yeah,
it's a great time also because there's that show on Netflix called One Piece.
Oh yes,
which is, you know, it's just manga is kind of happening.
It's really happening, and there's been a lot of delays, but what I've seen is really quite stunning.
How cool!
Yeah,
I think because I know that this is less important than every other event in this room, and they want the room at some juncture. I think that what we can do, even though I thought we'd do this afterwards, I'd be very curious to hear, and we can keep running. By the way, can we first of all just thank Colin for being here and for sharing everything with us.
Thank you.